when you think about Buddhism, what pops into your head? Probably meditation, right? Enlightenment, that whole search for personal salvation. And yeah, that's all true. But what if I told you that hidden inside this ancient spiritual tradition is a radical blueprint for politics, for justice, and for a truly democratic society?
Okay, let's get right into it, because this first part is all about challenging that common picture we have of Buddhism as being totally separate from the real world. And this is the real heart of what we're digging into. Could one of the world's great religions also be a blueprint for a political revolution? We're about to peel back those spiritual layers to find a deep, profound philosophy of governance that goes back 2,500 years.
So the popular view is that Buddhism is this otherworldly religion, right? All focused on an individual's journey to salvation. But the hidden reality, the part that scholars are really starting to bring to light, is that it's a very this-worldly philosophy, a complete plan for social and political reform, all centered on justice and equality.
Now, to really get where these radical ideas came from, we've got to go back in time, to the world that Buddha was born into. And let me tell you, it was a world that was practically begging for a change.
Back then, Indian society was run by the Brahminical order. This was a system where rulers were supposedly chosen by the gods, the social hierarchy was locked in stone, you were born into your place, and religious rules were absolute. The Buddhist alternative came along and was a direct challenge to every single one of those things. It said no, rulers should be chosen by the people, and society should be built on equality and rational thinking.
And this new philosophy, it found its biggest fans not in the old aristocracy, but with a new, rising middle class of merchants and landowners. These were people who were frankly tired of the old system and were looking for something that valued their individual freedom and a more open society.
You know, it's been called the Protestantism of the East, and that is such a great description. Just like Protestantism shook up the established religious authority in Europe, Buddhism acted as this powerful force for reform, questioning the very foundation of the whole Brahminical system.
So, if you're going to challenge an entire political system, you better have a good alternative ready to go. The Buddha, well, he found his inspiration for a new way of doing things in the community right there around him.
Let me introduce you to the Sangha. Now, this was not just a community of monks and nuns. You have to think of it as a living, breathing experiment in democracy. It had its own constitution, a detailed legal code called the Vinaya, and it was built on principles that were just totally revolutionary for their time.
Let's break down how this actually worked. Leadership was chosen, not inherited. They had regular meetings for open, honest discussion. And this is crucial. Decisions were made by consensus, based on reasoned arguments, not because some leader just said so. And the whole thing was held together by a shared legal code that everyone agreed to live by.
And the Buddha didn't just invent this stuff out of thin air. He was inspired by the smaller tribal republics of his day, which had a much more open, participatory government. He basically took their ideas, refined them, and created what we would now call a deliberative democracy.
Now, this new philosophy of governing by reason and consensus, well, it was on a direct collision course with the most influential political theory of the time.
On the other side of the ring, you had Kautilya. His major work, the Arthashastra, was basically the official playbook for being an absolute monarch. His philosophy was pretty simple. A ruler's power is absolute, and using force and coercion is totally fine if it helps maintain order and grow the state.
I mean, you literally could not have two more different ideas about kingship. Kautilya's monarch gets his authority from brute force. The Buddha's ideal ruler gets it from a social contract with the people. One rules with violence, the other with righteousness, or Dhamma. One's goal is just order at any cost. The other's is social welfare and justice.
So, the absolute game changer here is this idea of the Mahasammata, the great elect. This is huge. It's saying a king isn't a god, he's a public servant, chosen by the people to rule for them. His power comes from the consent of the governed. That, right there, is the core of a social contract.
Okay, ideas are great, but did anyone ever actually try to run a massive empire this way? The answer is a big, resounding yes. And that brings us to the incredible reign of Emperor Ashoka.
Inside one of India's greatest empires, you can see this amazing philosophical shift happen. Emperor Ashoka's grandfather, Chandragupta, built his empire straight out of Kautilya's playbook, all power and force. But when Ashoka converted to Buddhism, he did a complete 180 and turned the empire into what you could pretty much call history's first large-scale welfare state. And this wasn't just some vague, nice idea. It was actual policy.
Ashoka's government was built on these pillars. The principle of Dhamma, or righteousness, became a public moral code. Social justice and compassion became goals of the state. He promoted public discussion as a part of governing. And what's really amazing is that he actively pushed for religious tolerance, supporting all faiths and refusing to make Buddhism the state religion.
So, what does this all add up to? When you take a step back and look at this history, a really powerful and surprising conclusion just jumps right out.
Here it is. This is the big takeaway. We usually think of concepts like the social contract, the welfare state, and secularism as things that came out of the European Enlightenment. But the evidence shows these exact ideas were being debated, developed, and even put into practice in India over 2,000 years ago, all rooted in Buddhist philosophy.
I mean, let's just tick them off the list. The social contract, where power comes from the people? Yup. The welfare state, where the government is responsible for its citizens' well-being? Check. Deliberative democracy, or government by discussion? You bet. And a commitment to secular governance and religious freedom? Absolutely. These are all the foundational pillars of modern democracy, showing up in ancient Buddhist thought. And that leaves us with one last question to chew on. This ancient blueprint for a more just and compassionate society wasn't just some philosopher's dream. It was put into practice on a massive scale. So, if these ideas were possible way back then, what can they teach us about the challenges of governance, justice, and community in our own modern world?